I'm Samantha Hart, 34 years old, sitting at the defense table in my own courtroom, my thumb slowly rubbing the edge of the red wolf scarf resting in my lap. Across the aisle, Kevin and Karen were laughing with their attorney, already mentally spending the $5.5 million they believed they were about to take from me. They didn't recognize me at all. Then the bailiff's voice rang out, sharp and formal. All rise for the Honorable Judge Samantha Hart. My parents stood, expecting a stranger, but I rose with them. I walked past the bar, climbed the steps, and took my seat behind the bench. Their lawyer's smug grin vanished in an instant. Today, I need you to be the jury. If your parents discarded you like excess baggage for profit, would you welcome them back for a second chance, or would you destroy them? Comment guilty or innocent right now. I want to know where you stand before I tell you what they did. It was 1994, and O'Hare International Airport felt like the loudest place on the planet. Terminal 3 vibrated with constant noise that traveled straight through the soles of my sneakers. People rushed past, announcements echoed overhead, and conveyor belts droned endlessly. Yet I felt completely disconnected from the movement, like a stone stuck in a river while everything else rushed by. I was 5 years old, wrapped in a red wool scarf that scratched my neck. It was too long, dragging across the dirty linoleum, but I wouldn't take it off. It was the only shield I had against the cold gusts from the automatic doors. Kevin and Karen walked ahead of me, not holding my hand. They kept checking their watches, their movements clipped and coordinated. They didn't look like parents about to lose a child. They looked like professionals late for a meeting, irritated and impatient. Karen glanced back at me with narrowed eyes and snapped, "Keep up, Samantha, you're slowing us down." They guided me past ticket counters, past joyful reunions at the gates, all the way to oversized baggage claim. It was a vast industrial room where golf bags and car seats clattered onto a metal carousel. The air reeked of jet fuel and old coffee. "Wait here," Kevin said, pointing at a metal bench bolted to the floor. "Watch the bags. We need to get the tickets. Don't move until we come back." "How long?" I asked in a tiny voice. "Just count the bags," Karen replied without looking at me, her eyes fixed on the exit signs. "Count 500. We'll be back by then." I sat down, pulled the red scarf up over my nose, and began counting. 2, 3, a pair of skis, a guitar case, a taped cardboard box. 50. 100. The crowd slowly disappeared. The belt's hum became steady and hypnotic. 200. 300. When I reached 500, the carousel stopped. Everyone else had taken their belongings and left. The lights seemed dimmer, buzzing with that low electric sound only empty places make. I sat there clutching the scarf, and a realization hit me that a 5-year-old shouldn't have words for. They weren't late. They weren't lost. The expression on their faces as they walked away hadn't been fear. It was relief. They had left me at oversized baggage because that's exactly what I was to them. Heavy. Inconvenient. Something to be dropped off and never picked up. Then the silence crashed over me. It wasn't calm or peaceful. It was thick and crushing, squeezing my chest until breathing felt impossible. That silence broke something inside me. It stole my voice. For 4 years after that night, I barely spoke. I let life happen to me because I was terrified to make noise. It took me 30 years to understand that silence could be a weapon, not just a wound. Today, when I sit on the bench and the courtroom falls silent, waiting for my decision, I own that silence. I wield it. But back then in Terminal 3, the silence owned me. It told me I was nothing. I don't know how long I sat there frozen. Eventually, a security guard gliding by on a Segway noticed me, did a double take, and turned back. Before he could speak, a man in a gray suit stepped out from behind a pillar. He had been there for some time, watching, waiting to see if anyone would return for me. He was tall, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't look heroic. He looked like an accountant. "She's with me," the guard said, reaching for his radio. "I'm calling social services." "No," the man said quietly, his soft voice cutting through the air like steel. He walked over and knelt in front of me, ignoring the filth on the floor. He didn't touch me. He simply looked into my eyes and truly saw me. "My name is William," he said. "I saw them leave. I'm sorry." He didn't lie. He didn't pretend they were coming back. He told me the truth, and in doing so, he saved me from the lie I was desperately clinging to. He stayed until the police arrived. He stayed through foster care. Eventually, he stayed forever. He became the safety net that caught me when my own parents let me fall. William died on a Tuesday morning, quietly, just like he lived. There were no headlines, no applause, just a small service attended by shelter staff he had secretly supported for decades. I sat in the front row wearing the red scarf, feeling the familiar weight of silence settle around me again. He had been my anchor, the proof that I wasn't just baggage meant to be abandoned. Then came the will. I expected maybe his house, perhaps a modest savings account. Instead, the lawyer handed me a thick portfolio of documents. William wasn't just a retired accountant. He was an early investor in 3 of the biggest tech startups of the 90s. He lived simply so he could give freely. The final figure was $5,500,000. $100,000 for each year of his 55-year career. He left every cent to me. The news broke 2 days later. Local judge inherits secret fortune. It was the signal I had feared. Exactly 48 hours later, there was a knock at my door. Not a phone call. A process server. I was handed a lawsuit at my own home. Fraudulent custody and estate theft. The plaintiffs were Kevin and Karen Hart. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't request a meeting. They sued me. They claimed William had abducted me from the airport 30 years ago. They claimed they had spent decades searching, victims of an elaborate kidnapping scheme. They demanded the entire $5.5 million as compensation for their pain and suffering, along with the deed to William's house. I sat in my living room reading the complaint. It was a work of fiction. They described their anguish at losing their precious daughter, the emptiness in their hearts that never healed. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I shifted into Chambers mode. I stopped reading as a daughter and started reading as a judge. And that's when I noticed it. The narcissistic ledger. To normal parents, a child is a human being. To Kevin and Karen, I was never a child. I was an asset. When I was 5 years old, I was a liability, another mouth to feed, a weight they had to drag through an airport. So they liquidated me. They left me at baggage claim to minimize their losses. 30 years later, my value had changed. I was no longer a liability. I was a receivable, attached to a $5.5 million balance. They didn't come back because they missed me. They came back because their investment had finally matured and they wanted to cash out. It wasn't love. It was bookkeeping. They were trying to reconcile their accounts using my life. The audacity of it, the raw and unapologetic greed, burned away the final traces of the frightened little girl still buried inside me. They believed they were suing a victim. What they didn't realize was that they were suing the law itself. I set the papers down. I didn't immediately call an attorney. Instead, I walked to the mirror and studied my reflection. I saw the eyes of the child who once counted to 500. I saw the woman who had sent criminals to prison for far less than this. Motion denied. I whispered to the empty room. I picked up my phone and dialed the best forensic accountant in the state. "I need you to dig," I told her. "Go back to 1994. Find everything." They wanted a fight. I would give them a war, and I would make sure the price of this lawsuit was everything they had left. I didn't respond to the complaint. I didn't call Kevin or Karen to scream, beg, or ask why. That's what a daughter would have done. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a plaintiff preparing a case against 2 defendants who had made a fatal accounting error. I entered Chambers mode. In my profession, feelings don't matter. Evidence does. I called Sarah Jenkins, the most ruthless forensic accountant in Chicago, and gave her a single directive. Go back to 1994 and trace their money, because grifters don't change. If they were greedy enough to sue me now, they were greedy enough to try to profit from me back then. You don't abandon a child without attempting to monetize the loss. For 3 days, my dining room became a war room. Tax returns, property records, and court archives covered the table, papers that smelled like dust and decay. People think the past stays buried. It doesn't. It just waits on microfiche. Sarah found it on a Tuesday night. Sam, she said evenly, look at 1995. I leaned over her shoulder. Buried inside digitized Cook County filings was a civil lawsuit. Kevin and Karen Hart versus American Continental Airlines. They hadn't simply walked away. They had sued the airline. I pulled the complete case file. My hands were steady, cold, as I turned the pages of my own erasure. The complaint was masterfully written. They claimed that on November 6, 1994, they had entrusted their beloved daughter to an airline employee for an unaccompanied minor flight to visit an ill relative. They alleged negligence. They said I had wandered off and disappeared because staff failed to supervise me. It was fiction. There was no ticket. There was no sick relative. They had walked me to baggage claim and abandoned me. But in 1995, before surveillance cameras and digital tracking, lies traveled easily. They claimed emotional distress and loss of consortium. They portrayed themselves as shattered parents whose child had been swallowed by the system. Then I saw the settlement. The airline, desperate to avoid headlines about a missing child, settled quietly. The amount was $450,000 in 1995. It was a fortune, enough to buy a house, cars, and decades of silence. But the check wasn't the smoking gun. The affidavit attached to it was. To receive the settlement, Kevin and Karen had signed a sworn statement. As I read it, for the first time in 30 years, the air left my lungs. We, the parents, acknowledge that the minor child, Samantha Hart, is presumed deceased. We accept this settlement as full and final compensation for the wrongful death and loss of our child, and we release the airline from all future liability. They had signed it. Kevin's signature was jagged and rushed. Karen's was neat and looping. They had legally declared me dead. They had looked at a document stating I no longer existed and exchanged my life for a check. They didn't lose me. They liquidated me. I leaned back in my chair. The anger in my chest didn't explode. It crystallized into something sharp and unbreakable. They sold my life for $450,000, spent it, and now they were back to sell me again. They thought I was a ghost. They believed ghosts couldn't fight. I picked up the phone and called my attorney. I have it, I said. Don't settle. We're going to trial. I looked at their signatures one final time. They had signed my death certificate. Now I would sign their reckoning. The trial became theater, and Kevin and Karen were its stars. They took the stand dressed in muted colors, their faces rehearsed masks of sorrow. Karen cried on cue, describing the hollow place in her heart that never healed. She spoke of endless agony, portraying two devoted parents victimized by a wealthy predator who stole their baby from a crowded terminal. It was convincing. If I hadn't lived the truth, I might have believed it myself. They didn't look like villains. They looked like mourners. They looked like parents who had set a place at the table for a ghost for 30 years. I watched from the defense table, my expression neutral. I didn't object or interrupt. I let them stack their monument to grief brick by brick, lie by lie, because the higher it rose, the harder it would collapse. When it was our turn, we didn't call experts or character witnesses. We called one name. The defense calls Megan Hart. The room went still. Kevin's head snapped toward the gallery. Karen released a sharp, broken sound. They never anticipated this. They believed Megan, the daughter they kept, the one they raised, was loyal. They believed she was part of the illusion. Megan walked down the aisle. She was 28, a social worker with tired eyes and a posture that apologized for existing. She didn't look at our parents. She looked directly at me. It felt like staring into a mirror shaped by a different life. We shared the same nose, the same jaw, but where I had hardened, she had grown heavy. She took the oath. And then she began to dismantle everything. Megan, my attorney asked, what was it like growing up in the Hart household? Megan took a breath that rattled through her entire body. It was like living in a mausoleum, she said. Her voice was soft but steady. I wasn't just their daughter. I was the replacement. I grew up in the shadow of a tragedy, but it wasn't about missing Samantha. It was about using her. The ghost-sibling paradox. I had always believed Megan was the lucky one. She was the one who went home. She was the one who had parents. But as she spoke, I understood how wrong I had been. I had escaped. She had been trapped in the performance for 28 years. They used the story, Megan continued. Every time rent was late, every time Dad lost money gambling, they brought up the tragedy. The church gave them money. Neighbors brought casseroles for years. My sister wasn't a person to them. She was currency. Her absence paid the bills. Karen jumped to her feet, her face flushed red. Megan, stop this. Don't you dare. Sit down. The bailiff shouted, but Megan didn't flinch. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a shoebox that smelled of mildew and old attic insulation. They told everyone they spent every dime searching for her, Megan said. They told me they hired investigators. They told me they scoured the earth. But when I was cleaning the attic last week looking for old photos, I found this. She opened the box. It wasn't filled with missing person flyers or letters to police departments. It was filled with casino receipts. Megan lifted a stack of faded thermal paper. These are from the Empress Riverboat Casino in Joliet. They're dated November 7th, 8th, and 9th, 1994. The week Samantha disappeared. While police were searching the airport, Kevin and Karen were gambling. They weren't looking for her. They were celebrating. The silence in the courtroom became absolute. It was the same suffocating silence I remembered from baggage claim, but this time it wasn't crushing me. It was crushing them. Megan looked at our parents, tears finally spilling free. I used to feel guilty that I was the one who stayed, she whispered. But now I understand Samantha was the one who got away. I was the one left behind. Kevin collapsed into his chair, a man whose entire life had just been exposed as hollow. They hadn't only abandoned one daughter. They had consumed the other. My attorney didn't allow the room to breathe. Megan's testimony had fractured the foundation, but we were there to bring the structure down completely. He approached the bench and laid a single yellow document in front of the presiding judge. Your Honor, he said, cutting through the stunned murmurs. The plaintiffs are asserting parental rights over an estate. However, this certified affidavit signed December 12, 1995, shows Kevin and Karen Hart legally declared their daughter, Samantha Hart, deceased. Kevin's face drained of color. Karen clutched his arm, her nails digging into cheap fabric. They knew that document well. It was the receipt for my life. The judge read it slowly. Her gaze hardened as she looked from the paper to the plaintiffs. The neutrality was gone, replaced by pure disgust. Mr. and Mrs. Hart, she said quietly, you accepted $450,000 from American Continental Airlines for the wrongful death of your child. You signed a sworn statement declaring her gone. So one of two things is true. Either you committed fraud and grand larceny in 1995, or you are committing perjury and fraud upon this court today. Which is it? The trap closed instantly. If they admitted I was alive back then, they were felons who stole nearly $500,000. If they maintained I was dead, they had no legal standing to sue me now, because ghosts have no heirs. Their attorney understood immediately. He physically stepped back and began packing his briefcase. I stood up without asking permission. I didn't wait for counsel. I walked into the center aisle and faced them. For 30 years, I had feared these people. Their memory haunted every silent room I entered. But now, seeing them shaking, cornered, and small, I realized they weren't monsters. They were parasites. You sold me, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I used the tone I reserve for sentencing violent offenders, calm and final. You didn't just leave me at the airport. You cashed me in. You put a price on your own child and spent it on blackjack and slot machines. Karen tried to speak, tears streaming as she reached for the same performance she had used on Churches, Neighbors, and Megan. Samantha, please, she sobbed. We were young. We were scared. We loved you. You declared me dead, I cut in. You signed a paper saying I no longer existed so you could buy a boat. Congratulations. You were right. The daughter you had is dead. She died in Terminal 3. I leaned closer and let the silence stretch until it nearly suffocated them. This was the gavel of silence. I wasn't drowning in it anymore. I was wielding it. A ghost can't inherit, Kevin. But a ghost can haunt. And I promise I will haunt you with every legal instrument I have until you regret ever walking back into my life. The judge slammed her gavel. It cracked like a gunshot. Case dismissed with prejudice. Bailiff, take the plaintiffs into custody. This matter is referred to the district attorney for immediate investigation into perjury and insurance fraud. Kevin and Karen screamed as officers moved in, but I didn't look back. I turned away from them the same way they once turned away from me. The aftermath was total. The statute of limitations on the 1995 fraud was complicated, but their perjury in open court was fresh. 3 weeks later, they were indicted. The news cycle shifted. The judge's secret fortune became the parents who sold their child. Their reputation burned to ash. The church cut ties. Neighbors demanded answers they couldn't give. Legal fees took their house. They were left with nothing. No money. No standing. No daughters. I didn't keep the $5.5 million. William hadn't given it to me for luxury. He gave it to me to build a net. I founded the Baggage Claim Foundation, providing elite legal defense for foster children aging out of the system, ensuring that when the state steps away, someone else steps forward. No child should ever sit alone in a terminal wondering if they matter. 6 months later, I sat in a downtown Chicago coffee shop. Across from me, Megan laughed at something I said. The weight was gone from her shoulders. She had left her agency job and joined the foundation as our lead social worker. We were building something new, brick by brick, free from our parents' lies. As I reached for my coffee, my coat sleeve slid back, revealing the red wool scarf. I didn't wear it for warmth anymore. I wore it because I liked it. It wasn't armor now. It was just a scarf. The cafe buzzed with noise, cups clinking, voices overlapping. Beneath it all, I felt the silence. Not the lonely silence of an airport, but the peaceful quiet of a closed case. A debt fully paid. I looked at Megan, at the work we were doing, and I understood William had been right all along. I wasn't the girl who was left behind. I was the girl who was caught.